Hi everyone, and welcome to tonight's panel on being bi and pan in STEM. My name is Vaneet, and I'm going to be chairing tonight's discussion. I have two wonderful speakers here with me tonight who are going to be talking about their experiences within their respective fields. But before I hand it over to them, just a quick introduction from me. Firstly, who am I? Well, my name is Vaneet Mehta, my pronouns are he, him, and I am an Indian bisexual man born and raised in Southall in West London. I work as a software engineer, but in my spare time I do a lot of work within the LGBTQ+ community. I volunteer for Middlesex Pride and Rainbow Films, and I co-created a YouTube channel called The Ambassadors, where we talk about bisexual issues. I'm also an avid writer. My writing has been featured on Stonewall and in Metro UK, and also in a bisexual anthology called The Bible New Testimonials. I've delivered talks to various companies on bisexuality and intersectionality, and I've also appeared on numerous panels talking about these same issues. I created the hashtag Bisexual Men Exist, and I'm also writing a book on bisexual men, as well as co-editing a book on bisexual voices. Now, the issue of bi and pan people in STEM is hard to fully quantify. Why? Well, firstly, STEM is quite a broad topic. There's a lot of different industries and different fields that come underneath this. So trying to understand the experiences of bi and pan people in STEM isn't easy. Likewise, statistics don't tend to talk about bi and pan people specifically. Instead, they talk about LGBTQ+ people, and therefore the individual issues tend to be hidden underneath this. But the statistics that we do have paint a bleak picture. Statistics from Stonewall on workplaces in general show that 18% of lesbian, gay and bisexual people aren't out to anyone in the workplace. However, when looking specifically at bisexual people, they show that 38% of bisexual people aren't out to anyone at work. This includes 49% of bisexual men and 34% of bisexual women. These are staggering statistics. What is the reason behind this? Well, let's look at STEM specifically. According to a report from 2019 entitled Exploring the Workplace for LGBTQ+ Physical Scientists, they saw that 18% of bisexual and pansexual people experience instances of intimidating, harassing, offensive or exclusionary behaviour in the workplace in the last 12 months because of their identity. As a result, 11% of them said that they felt uncomfortable or very uncomfortable in their work environment. This same report also showed that 28% of LGBTQ+ scientists thought about leaving their workplace because of the discrimination that they faced. My experiences in the workplace haven't particularly been great. The lack of any network of support, or even any mention of inclusion whatsoever, plus being in an environment that was such a bros club full of banter, meant that when I was struggling with my identity in my personal life, I couldn't talk about it at work. I felt like if I did, I may experience further discrimination. When I eventually did open up about my identity in the workplace, I felt like I had become a spokesperson. Everyone came to me to ask all of their questions, even if I didn't know the answer. I also experienced some of that infamous banter, where people were asking me why there couldn't be a straight pride. At least they said it was banter. It wasn't particularly funny. I'm now going to hand over to the other panelists and let them introduce themselves to you. And I'm also going to ask them to divulge their own personal experiences of being bi or pan in STEM and what barriers they face.
Hey y'all. Hey everyone. My name is Dr. Tiara Moore and I use she, her pronouns. And I identify as a Black pansexual woman. I'm also an environmental ecologist and a postdoctoral fellow. And so the question is, explain my experiences of being pansexual in STEM. And I would say it has definitely been an interesting experience for me, specifically because I think I didn't allow myself to explore my sexual identity until I had already got my PhD. So I think I was dealing with a lot of just other oppression from being a black woman. I'm dealing with a lot of racism that I was just trying to make space and fit in, really just trying to get my degree, trying to make it through. And I knew that I was already seen as other, and so I just really couldn't think about adding something else to that. And so it really wasn't until after I graduated with my PhD that I really started to say, hey, like, I need to figure out who I am. And so since then, I've definitely been open. And I think I've felt supported in the STEM community. It's really hard to know because, again, I deal with so much other oppression via racism and sexism. And so I think isms can add to things that I've experienced. So, yeah, that's my intro.
Hi everyone, my name is Anuradha Damlay, or Anu. My pronouns are she, her, and thank you so much for the organisers for having me here today. I'm an Indian, bisexual, pansexual, I don't know, queer woman who was born actually very close to Vaneet by coincidence in West London. We actually went up to the same school, but we didn't realise until like last year. Crazy. My day job is working as a researcher in international security. So I use my STEM background and my science policy background to ensure that countries and non-country actors, like potential terror groups, are not using technology for bad, however you define that, and that international treaties are upheld, and also avoiding war. I also voluntarily run the UK branch of Women of Colour Advancing Peace and Security, and WCAPS is what I'll refer to it from now on, and it's an NGO that advances the role of minorities in policy-making processes by centering them, providing them a platform and a network within security, conflicts transformation, peace at a domestic and international level. I also have a great passion for watching cricket, singing, and my dog Toast. Now, I only really came to terms with my sexuality once I left my parents' home, so I moved out February last year, which was great timing for a pandemic. But it gave me the space to figure out sort of who I am, and I know we'll go further in depth into this kind of stuff later on in the conversation. But at first, in my field, it was enough to worry about being a woman of colour. It was a rarity, and there is a lot of advocacy work going on around it, which is why I bought WCAPS here. But it was the first thing to worry about. It feels a bit counterintuitive that people worry about inclusivity in my field and representation at first instance, because my area of work is focused on making the world safer for everyone, in principle, right? Unfortunately, some people just won't let go of the reins and don't realise or acknowledge that no matter how many degrees you have, how large a platform you have, nothing is a replacement for experience, for tacit knowledge, for the things that you have gone through and that your community has gone through, and so you should be in a position to inform that. But unfortunately, there's no realization of that, and that's one thing that is difficult to communicate, not just as a woman of color, but when you're talking about queerness and safety and security. And that's something that isn't talked about enough in my field. And when you see the sort of concentrating attacks on LGBTQ people, trans people, it's hard to separate that from this idea of security. There's also this big expectation when it comes to how to present yourself. Again, coming back to being just a woman, I struggled to come out as queer in the first instance because, well, my family, as an Indian woman, but also because it was really evident to me that my white counterparts were always going to be held to a different set of expectations than I was, and a different set of behaviours. I was always going to be scrutinised more, and I have been. It turns out that coming out was great. There was a great community of support there for me, but there is very little institutional support, either because people don't prioritize it because they've been taught not to prioritize it, or their own biases, or, and I think more centrally to all of our fields, folks still don't center inclusion in their strategy, and they treat it as this like tack on thing. I think one of the other themes that I'm going to raise quite a bit today is that I'm tired of being treated a bit like an equity, diversity and inclusion Alexa, or if you watch The Good Place, Janet. This actually started when I was still in more mainstream STEM, but it has pervaded my life in international security and science policy, and it's kind of worse because, actually we'll come to that in a minute, but there's an expectation that at the drop of your hat you can act at this as this person that can solve problems or answer questions, even for communities that you don't represent, just because you're a minority and because you've spoken out about minority rights. And the vending machine nature is not limited to my field, but the reason why it is scary is because what I say can inform policy, or it can also be quoted by people at high level, like diplomats, like people in government, and it just feels like it's very high stakes sometimes. And often I've kind of got to the point where I'm like, why don't you hire someone to do this? Also, you know, how you present yourself and your queerness and how seriously you're taken impacts whether or not people will give you a platform. And again, that's, you know, how implicitly or explicitly are you treating it, their biases. So for instance, everyone in my field, there's this unspoken rule of professionalism online, and I've always used my Twitter account to talk about my life, my queerness, and also just life in general, which has been lauded as brave, which is patronising as heck. Finally, when you come around to talking about, you know, the advice you have to give and the things you have to do, the emotional labour is something that does not get talked about enough, even still, and this is something that, you know, lots of people have been talking about for a while. In a job that's already emotionally laborious itself, not just because it's to do with war, not just because often that war is being waged on communities that you are related to or close to, as a person of colour or as a queer person, you also have to face this sort of, if you can't solve it, no one else can. Oh, it's better to go to minorities to talk about minority issues, and queer issues. It's just tiring, and there are days where, as a person who loves talking about EDI and informing and training, there are days where I just get exhausted and want to disconnect from everything, but I'm not allowed to. But yeah, let's chat more, and I'm excited for the rest of this event. Thank you.